I'm Reed Marston, 38, maintenance lead. Finally bought my first house after a decade of overtime and cold dinners. Then Mom set down her pie, looked me in the eye, and said, "This house belongs to the family now. Leave your keys." I'd spent 12 years saving for that roof. Turns out they'd spent weeks planning to take it. But I bet they didn't expect the locksmith's drill to come before the lawyer's pen. If this hits home, tell me where you're listening from. I'll be here. I remember the way the key felt in my hand that first day. Solid, cool, and just a little heavier than I expected. Maybe it was the weight of everything I'd put into it. 10 years of busted knuckles, skipped weekends, lukewarm coffee from vending machines, and a string of missed holidays I tried not to think too hard about. That brass key didn't just open a front door. It said I'd finally arrived somewhere I built myself. Grandpa used to say a man's keychain tells you who he is. Mine had one house key, a bottle opener shaped like a trout, and a fob from the auto plant where I'd worked night shifts, straight out of trade school. No fluff, just survival. Just mine. The backyard was quiet that late summer afternoon in Hollow Brook, the kind of quiet that reminded me why I chose this town. Far enough from the noise, close enough to what mattered. The grass had gone a little long again. I'd meant to mow it 2 days ago, but the job ran late, and my knees had been barking louder than usual. I figured the grass could wait. Everything else always had. I was halfway through scraping paint off the back fence when I heard Russell's truck pull into the driveway. That old Dodge of his whined like a kid faking sick, but it still made the turn cleaner than I ever could. He leaned out the window, sunglasses on, hair already sticking up in that careless way that made him look 5 years younger than me, though we'd graduated the same year. "Well, damn," he said, stepping out. "I thought you'd at least put a grill back here by now. Where's the beer fridge and the welcome friends mat?" I wiped sweat on my sleeve. "Didn't buy it to impress anybody." "That much is obvious," he laughed. "You still got that busted ceiling fan inside?" I smirked. "I like the noise it makes. Helps me sleep." He followed me into the house, shaking his head at the screen door that squealed like it needed oil and attention, like most things I owned. The walls still smelled like new drywall and paint, cheap department store beige that I hadn't bothered to color match. One of these days I'd put up something warmer. Maybe. Maybe not. "You know," he said, flopping onto the recliner I'd salvaged from the curb 6 months back. "Most people throw a party when they close on a house. You lock the door and vanish for 3 weeks. "Didn't feel like celebrating," I said, grabbing 2 bottles from the fridge. Felt more like breathing for the first time. He nodded, took the beer, didn't push it. That's why he was still in my life. I stood near the window, watching a few kids ride past on bikes, half listening as Russell talked about work, the new boss nobody liked, and his sister's upcoming wedding. It all rolled off his tongue like things that belonged in a life I hadn't touched in years. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I picked it up. "Mom, dinner Sunday. Us, you, Toby. We want to see the new backsplash." I stared at the message longer than I probably should have. The wording was simple, casual, but it pressed a knot in my stomach I hadn't felt since my first mortgage payment cleared. "Everything good?" Russell asked, sipping. I showed him the screen. He squinted. "Your mom invited herself over." "Technically, she asked." "Your mom asked." I nodded. He raised an eyebrow. "Then I'd be worried." I laughed, but it was thin. The truth is, I hadn't planned on showing them the house anytime soon. Not because I was hiding it, though maybe I was, but because this place had started as my space. The one space where I didn't have to hear about how I was wasting time, or how I could have saved more if I'd just moved into the basement at home like Toby had. Still, I typed back, "Sure. See you then." Russell watched me. You okay? Yeah, I lied. It's just a dinner. Just a dinner, he echoed. You still got that bottle of bourbon we split when your loan was approved? I nodded. Save me a glass, he said. You might need it after they leave. Later that evening, after Russell had gone and the house fell quiet again, I sat at the kitchen table, ran my fingers along the edge of the backsplash I'd installed myself, crooked in one spot, but I left it that way. It reminded me that I didn't need it to be perfect. I just needed it to be mine. I glanced over at the key on the hook near the door, the brass one, worn smooth from years in my pocket. That dinner was supposed to be about showing them what I'd built. I didn't know they'd come to claim it. And looking back now, maybe I should have trusted the knot in my gut. Maybe I should have said no. But I didn't. And that's where everything started. Mom brought pie. Dad brought legal pads. They walked in with the air of dinner guests, smiles fixed, shoulders squared, not a trace of dust on their shoes. But once seated, they sat like judges, eyes roaming, mouths tight, assessing. I'd lit candles, not because I wanted ambiance, but because the overhead light in the dining room flickered when the ceiling fan ran on high. The pork roast sat in the middle of the table, perfectly browned, resting on the dish I rarely used. The same one Mom gave me my first Christmas away from home. She'd wrapped it in floral tissue and said, "Just in case you ever cook for someone besides yourself." No one complimented the roast, or the mashed potatoes, or the apple slaw I'd made from a recipe I remembered her using when I was a kid. Instead, Mom looked around like she was comparing me to a listing on Zillow. "This wall wasn't here when you bought the place, right?" she asked. Number I put it in, divided the kitchen off from the laundry area. She nodded. That was it. Just a hum. The kind of sound she'd make when a neighbor's kid came back from college with a nose ring. Dad ran his fingers along the chair rail. I saw him tilt his head slightly, like he was looking for imperfections in the cut. His lips pressed together like he was chewing disappointment. Toby, my younger brother by 3 years, reached for the breadbasket without saying a word. His phone buzzed in his lap. He glanced down, thumbed something quick, then set it face down beside his plate. "Looks good," he said, gesturing toward the roast. He didn't sound like he meant it. He sounded like he remembered someone telling him, "That's what you're supposed to say." I tried to fill the silence. "Work's been steady. We're rolling out a new assembly line. I've been helping troubleshoot sensor failures." "Still at the auto parts plant?" Dad asked. I nodded. "3rd year, next month." "Good benefits?" "Solid." He nodded but didn't look impressed, just noted. Mom sipped her sweet tea. "What's the resale value now, with the renovations?" I paused, not planning to sell. She gave that same hum again. "Well, it's always good to know, in case life shifts." Toby chuckled. "You're really sitting on a lot of space for one person, man. I mean, full backyard, 2 bathrooms. Come on." "It's what I saved for," I said too quickly. No one responded. I focused on my plate. The roast was tender, but my appetite was slipping fast. Every bite felt like I had to swallow twice. We made it through most of the meal in stretches of forced conversation and cutlery clinking against ceramic. Then, just as I was pouring coffee, Dad cleared his throat. "We've been thinking," he began. I should have known then. Dad never thought out loud unless the decision had already been made. "This house, it's too much for one person. And frankly, it should work for the whole family." My hand froze, cup midair. "I'm not following." Mom set down her fork gently. Her voice was soft. That made it worse. "You've had your time, Reed. You've done well. But this house, it's part of our family now. We helped you get here." I blinked. "Helped me? I bought this place myself. Because we raised you. Because we supported you through all those years," she said. Dad leaned forward, steepling his fingers like he was at a boardroom table. "We're saying it's time. Let us take over. You can stay, of course, for now. But give us the keys. We'll manage things. Toby's already looked at reconfiguring the layout. Open up the floor plan. Maybe add a ramp for your mother. A ramp, I repeated. She walks fine. For now, he said sharply. Toby didn't meet my eyes. He was busy buttering a roll, as if this whole conversation wasn't surreal. You want me to hand you the house? I asked. Dad didn't flinch. It's not about ownership. It's about responsibility. Family sacrifices must circle back. Mom nodded like they'd practiced this in the car. I stared at them, at their plates, at the empty pie dish between us, at the key on the hook near the door. My key. I saved for this. I didn't ask you for a dime, I said. Quieter now. Dad pushed his chair back just slightly. What's yours is ours, son. You wouldn't have anything if not for us. Something in me wanted to stand, to yell, to throw my fork. But I didn't. I looked down at the table, at my hands. They were shaking. I felt heat crawl up the back of my neck. Then it faded and everything went cold. Cold in my arms. Cold in my chest. Cold in my voice. I picked up the coffee pot and poured myself a cup like we weren't in the middle of a takeover. Nobody moved. I said nothing more, because I knew, deep in my gut, in a way that coffee couldn't fix, that this wasn't about gratitude, or care, or even family. It was about control, and control doesn't always arrive with shouting. Sometimes it knocks politely, brings pie, and asks for the keys like it's owed. It wasn't the dinner that broke me. It was the call on Monday. The fence out back had started leaning again. Nothing urgent, just a sag in the hinge where the post met the gate. I'd meant to fix it earlier that week, but between the dinner and the silence afterward, I hadn't touched a tool in 2 days. The sun was out, but the air felt heavy. That late summer humidity that makes your shirt stick to your back before you've even broken a sweat. I was crouched with a socket wrench in one hand and the taste of burnt coffee still clinging to my mouth when my phone buzzed on the porch railing. Unknown number. I almost let it go. But something in me, it wasn't instinct, just habit, made me wipe my hands and answer. This is Reed. A pause. Then a woman's voice, professional but friendly, with the faint drawl you only hear if you've lived in this part of Ohio long enough to catch it. Mr. Marston, this is Sandy McKee with the Franklin County Deed Office. I'm calling to verify a request we received last week. I stood slowly. What kind of request? She shuffled papers. I could hear it. It's regarding a title amendment on your property, adding 2 co-owners. I blinked, wiped the sweat from my forehead. What? The request lists your parcel number, mortgage details, and social security number, but no signed authorization from you, so we flagged it. The wrench slipped from my hand and hit the grass with a dull thud. Who were the names? She didn't hesitate. Howard and Carol Marston. My heart thudded against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I turned toward the house but didn't move. My legs had stiffened. My fingers curled into fists without asking me. They used my social? I asked, voice lower now. Yes, sir. Which is why I'm calling. We wanted to confirm before taking any action. We haven't processed anything. Nothing's changed legally, but, well, it's concerning. I didn't authorize that, I said. Understood. Would you like us to place a security hold on the file? Yes, please, immediately. I thanked her, twice, but I don't remember hanging up. I just remember the silence afterward, the way the world tilted, just slightly, like someone had loosened the screws on my foundation and walked away smiling. I stumbled inside. The door creaked like it always did, but now it grated. Everything grated. The living room felt foreign, too clean, too still. I looked at the wall where I'd hung the first framed photo after moving in. Me and Russell standing in front of the garage, holding paint rollers like we knew what we were doing. I stared at that picture as my breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just a conversation gone wrong. This wasn't tension over mashed potatoes. They were trying to take my house. My damn house. I paced. 5 steps to the hallway. Turn, 5 back. My hands shook. I gripped the counter, opened the fridge, closed it again. I called Russell. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey man, that bad?" "They tried to put their names on the deed," I said flat. "What?" "Dad and Mom. They filed a request with the county. Gave them my social." He was quiet for a beat. Then, "You sure?" "I just got off the phone with the deed office. Sandy. She said they flagged it, but it was all there. Parcel ID, mortgage info, everything." "Jesus," he said. "I'm locking it down." "Good. And after that?" I looked out the window. The grass still needed cutting. But suddenly, it didn't seem important. "I don't know," I said. We talked for another minute, maybe 2. I don't remember what was said. I just remember the static hum of the phone line and the hollow thud in my chest that wouldn't go away. After we hung up, I sat at the table. My fingers drummed against the wood, out of rhythm, out of sync with anything but my heartbeat. A few weeks back, Dad had asked me what kind of mortgage I'd signed. Fixed or variable. I'd brushed it off at the time, assumed it was idle curiosity or his version of making conversation. Now I knew better. Now I could see every look from Sunday night for what it really was. Every comment about space. Every nod about resale value. They weren't worried about me. They were circling, measuring. Predators don't always growl. Sometimes they smile and ask how many bathrooms you have. My phone buzzed again. Dad. I stared at the screen. It vibrated in my hand like it was trying to leap away. I didn't pick up. Couldn't. Wouldn't. I just sat there, the call ringing out into nothing, the phone eventually falling silent again. They'd said they loved me. That family took care of its own. But I wasn't sure what part of this felt like love. Maybe blood was thicker than water. But it flowed a hell of a lot faster when you realized you were the one bleeding. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I could stop it. I didn't sleep that night. I watched the ceiling fan spin until the motor gave out a soft click, like even it was tired of pretending everything could keep moving. The next morning, I called Russell before the sun even finished waking the windows. He picked up with a groggy, "Yeah?" "They tried to steal the house," I said. "For real." That woke him up. 20 minutes later, he was standing in my kitchen, a travel mug of black coffee in one hand, and his other already raking through his hair like he was trying to solve a math problem with scalp pressure. "Jesus, Reed," he muttered, after I walked him through everything. "They filed with your social?" "Yeah." He paced, back and forth between the fridge and the sink like he was wearing down a track. "You need a damn lawyer. Now, not tomorrow, not next week, now." "I know. I'll call Marla." That name hit like a cold press on a bruise. "You still in touch with her?" He nodded. "She handled my sister's divorce. The other side tried to forget the retirement accounts. Marla didn't just catch it. She nailed them to the courtroom wall with it." "She expensive?" "Yeah," he said, then took a long sip. "But she's worth every dime." 2 hours later, I was in her office, an old converted Craftsman 2 blocks off Main, the kind of place with hardwood floors that creaked just enough to feel honest. The lobby smelled like lemon oil and printer toner. Marla DeWitt didn't stand when I walked in. She looked up from a yellow legal pad and waved me into the seat across from her. She wore a dark green blouse, wire rim glasses, and a wedding ring that looked like it hadn't moved since 1990. Her expression was hard to read, Not cold, not warm, just precise. Like a math teacher who'd seen every kind of wrong answer but still gave partial credit when it counted. "Russell told me enough to worry me," she said. I nodded. "I think they used my personal info to try and add themselves to the deed. Sandy from the registrar's office called it in." Marla tapped her pen against her notepad. "Do you have copies of the deed paperwork? Original title? Mortgage agreement?" "Yeah, all in a file at home." "Good. Bring that, and lock that file cabinet if it's not already." Something about the way she said it made my stomach dip. Later that afternoon, I walked back into my house, still half expecting to find it ransacked, even though the locks hadn't been touched. Everything looked the same. Almost. The office drawer where I kept my documents was closed, but not all the way. That was the first thing. The second was the chair, slightly angled away from the desk. And then the folder itself, my folder, just off, like someone had opened it, maybe even put it back in a hurry. I flipped through. Tax returns, mortgage approval, insurance, no birth certificate, no copy of my social. They'd been in here. I stood still for a long time. Let the silence sit on my chest like a dumbbell. Then I picked up the phone and called Marla. "Missing documents?" she asked. "Yeah." "Then this just changed," she said. "If they've crossed into forgery and identity fraud, we're no longer in family dispute territory." My mouth went dry. "You want to press charges?" she asked. "I don't know." "You don't have to decide right now, but I'm putting safeguards in place regardless, and you need to understand something, Reed." "Okay." "They've already decided how far they're willing to go. The only thing left is figuring out how far you're willing to go to stop them." I didn't have an answer. I just stared out the window, watching two squirrels fight over the bird feeder like they owned it. When I got off the call, I sat down at my desk and powered up my old laptop. The fan sputtered a little before humming to life. 37 unread emails. One stood out. From Carol Marston. Subject, "Let's talk. No lawyers, just family." I stared at the screen. My finger hovered over the mouse. Just family. The words sounded sweet, didn't they? Like maybe everything could go back to normal if I just agreed to ignore what had happened. But I knew better now. Funny how fast people say, "family first," when they're already standing on your porch, emptying your house. Aunt Lorna always made her pies sweet, but her truths bitter. We met at a diner off Route 49, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and ceiling fans that spun mostly for show. It was 2 in the afternoon, and the place still smelled like breakfast. Syrup and fried sausage and burnt coffee, the way only small-town Ohio can. She was already there when I walked in. Same blunt haircut I remembered from childhood, same floral print blouse, but the lines on her face had deepened, like they'd been carved slowly by silence. "Reed," she said, sliding a mug across the table toward me. "Still drink it black?" I nodded. "Didn't know you remembered." "I remember more than people think," she said, "especially when they'd rather I didn't." We sat in that booth, the plastic cushion sticking slightly to the backs of my arms. For a minute, we didn't talk. Just sipped coffee and watched the waitress refill the next table's cups without asking. When I was 12, Lorna vanished from holidays, birthdays, and family cookouts. One year, she brought a lemon pie and laughed too loud at Dad's corny jokes. The next, she was gone. Mom called her dramatic, said she'd moved to the city and liked her freedom. Now I knew that was code for something else. "I heard about the house," Lorna finally said. I looked down at my mug. "Of course you did." She smiled, but there wasn't much warmth behind it. "Carol's always had a way of pulling the strings and blaming the knots on everyone else." I leaned back. Why'd you really leave, Lorna? She took a deep breath. Because your mother tried to take control of Grandma's retirement fund. Said she needed to manage it since Grandma was getting forgetful. Problem was, Grandma wasn't. She still did her own crossword puzzles in pen. I stared. She tried to move everything into a joint account. I caught it before it cleared, filed a complaint. Your mother spun it as me lashing out. Said I was stressed, jealous, and everyone, your uncles, even your dad, they all chose not to deal with it. Easier that way. I felt something heavy land in my chest. She made it look like you were the problem. She always does, Lorna said softly. And it works because she never yells. She just tilts her head and lets people fill in the gaps. I sat with that for a long moment. The clink of forks and the low hum of a country song on the jukebox filled the space between us. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked. Because you were a kid. And then, well, you were loyal. I didn't want to make you choose. She reached into her purse and pulled out a worn envelope, yellowed at the edges, slid it across the table. What's this? Copy of the complaint I filed, and the letter I wrote to your mother when I withdrew it. I didn't open it. I shouldn't have backed down, she added, but I was tired and alone. I looked at the envelope again, then at her. She's doing the same thing to me now, just with a house instead of a pension. Lorna nodded. Carol doesn't know how to let go of something once she smells value. Doesn't matter if it's emotional, financial, or symbolic. The waitress dropped the check off quietly. Lorna tucked a 5 under the mug, the way she probably always had. As we stood to leave, she turned to me and said, You're not the first, Reed. But maybe you're the first to stop her. I walked her to her car. The sun had started dipping behind the grain silos across the lot, casting long shadows that reached all the way to our feet. She turned to me one last time, hand on the driver's side door. If your mom played clean, Lorna said, she'd never need the whole deck. Some letters come too late, others arrive right on time, even a decade after postmark. The rain had been tapping the roof since late afternoon, the kind that softens everything. The air, your thoughts, even the way your shoes sound on the stairs. I was supposed to be sorting through boxes in the attic, looking for my high school tax forms Marla had requested. I ended up finding something else. It was buried beneath a stack of old workshop manuals and a binder labeled Chemistry 101, tucked inside a cardboard box that still had my name scrawled across the side in permanent marker. Under it, spring semester, never finished. The envelope was plain. No return address, no stamp, hand-delivered. The corner was folded, slightly torn. The seal had come undone on its own, or maybe I had started to open it once and thought better of it. I sat on the floor, cross-legged like I used to do during finals week, and stared at my name written in blue ink. Reed, with a little loop under the D. Her handwriting hadn't changed. I opened it slowly. The paper made a soft crackle like it was waking up from a long sleep. You're not going to read this right away, it began, maybe never. But I need to say it, even if it never lands anywhere but this page. Her voice came back in that instant, soft but steady, the way it had been when she explained things to me no one else could. Why I clenched my jaw when my father raised his voice. Why I apologized before asking for anything. Why I called loyalty love even when it cost me too much. I know your dad is sick, and I know you think coming home is what you're supposed to do. That family comes first. That duty matters. But I want you to ask yourself something, Reed. When do you come first? That line hit harder than anything I'd read in years. I remembered the night I told her I was leaving school. She'd held her breath so long I thought she might forget to exhale. You're walking away from this, she said, From us." I'd nodded, and she'd nodded too. Just once. Not out of agreement, but acceptance. "You keep choosing them over you," the letter went on. "And I love you. But I can't be part of that anymore. I won't watch you disappear into the shadows of someone else's expectations." I swallowed. My throat had gone dry. She hadn't been cruel, just clear. The letter wasn't long, just one page, front and back. But near the end, one sentence stood alone, underlined. "Maybe one day you'll choose yourself." I folded the letter carefully, slid it into the inside pocket of my coat that was still hanging by the attic hatch. I didn't know what tomorrow would look like, but I knew one thing. Tomorrow, I'd choose me. Toby never built fences. He broke them, and expected me to rebuild. The backyard was quieter than usual, though the air still carried the faint scent of late summer grass and the sound of cicadas bleeding out the last of the season. The fence line stretched out behind the house, its wood weathered and sun-bleached, with one panel that still leaned slightly where the wind had taken it a year ago. I'd fixed it back then, just like I fixed most things. Toby had laughed when I hammered it back into place. "Why bother?" he'd said. "It'll just fall again." Now he leaned against that same panel like it owed him something. His truck idled nearby. Micah sat in the passenger seat, chin resting on the window, eyes half closed, not quite watching, not quite looking away. I wondered how much he understood. Probably more than I wanted to admit. "You serious with all this?" Toby asked, kicking at the dirt with the toe of his boot. "All what?" "The lawyers, the drama, turning this into some courtroom movie of the week. You think I asked for this?" "You didn't say no," he said, folding his arms. "You could have worked it out. Quietly." "Quietly," I echoed. "Like Lorna? Like Grandma?" He looked away. "They're just trying to secure the family's future," he muttered. "Not just theirs. Ours, mine, Micah's. You don't get it?" "I get it," I said. "I just don't agree." Toby stepped away from the fence, hands on his hips now. "You always had this thing where you made yourself the victim. Even as a kid. Dad grounded you for skipping school. Suddenly he was controlling. Mom asked about your homework. You said she was smothering." "This isn't about homework," I said quietly. "No, it's about you blowing up the family over a piece of land and some paperwork." I took a breath, stepped forward. "You know what I see, Toby? I see a kid in that truck who's watching his dad defend people who manipulate and take and justify it all with the word family." Micah's eyes flicked up. He saw me now, really saw me. "You think I'm selfish?" I said. "I'm trying to make sure he doesn't grow up thinking love means obedience, or silence." Toby's jaw clenched. "You think I'm raising him wrong?" "I think you're repeating what we grew up in, and I won't be quiet while it happens again." He shook his head, laughed once, bitter. "You sound like a podcast." "Better than sounding like Dad." That did it. His face went tight, pale around the edges, but he didn't swing, didn't yell. He just stepped back. "Then don't call when this blows back on you," he said, walking toward the truck. He didn't slam the door, just opened it, slid inside. Micah didn't look at me again. The truck reversed slow, then rolled away without a word. I stood there a while longer, hand resting on the top edge of the fence, like it might still hold something together. It didn't. Sometimes family isn't who you'd die for. It's who you stop the damage for. The mailbox didn't just hold bills. It held threats, scribbled in family handwriting. The envelope was tucked between a utility statement and a coupon flyer for half-off mulch. No stamp, no return address, just folded paper in a familiar slant. Mom's handwriting always looked like she was still in Sunday school. Tight loops, overly neat, like she cared how God saw it. But this time, It said only 5 words. Family doesn't sue family. Please. No signature. Just that line. No heart sticker like she used to put on birthday cards. No warmth. Just pressure, dressed up as concern. I held the paper in my hand for a long time, watching the porch light flicker, on, off, on again. The bulb was dying, and I hadn't bothered to change it. Maybe part of me liked the idea of sitting in the dark a little longer. Inside, I sat at the kitchen table, laptop open. Marla's face appeared on the screen. Sharp, steady, wearing the same blazer she always did in court, even though we were just talking through video. "Read it to me," she said. I did. She didn't blink. "Anything else?" I slid a manila folder into view. Sandy at the deed office called again. Someone tried to open a new line of credit under my name last week. Different address, Mom and Dad's. Marla wrote something down. "This confirms a pattern. Attempted property fraud, misuse of Social Security, now identity theft." "Still no proof it was them directly," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. "Legally, no, but this note helps. It implies knowledge of your legal action. Combined with the financial attempts, it's enough to build a case for harassment and protective orders." I rubbed my temples. The ache hadn't left me since Sunday. "What now?" "We file a cease and desist. I'll prepare the restraining order paperwork. Once signed, they can't contact you directly, not even through third parties. Any more attempts, and we escalate to criminal." I exhaled slowly. My shoulders dropped an inch. Russell called as soon as the meeting ended. "You okay?" "They're digging deeper," I said. "Credit fraud this time." He swore softly under his breath. "You sure you don't want me to go over there?" "Number." "That's not what this needs." "What it needs," he said, "is for you to stop playing defense. They've gone too far. You need to hit back, now." I didn't answer. Not right away. After we hung up, I stood in the hallway for a while. The quiet of the house wrapped around me like an old sweater, one with holes you forgot were there until you reached for your keys. My eyes landed on the emergency key box under the front porch beam, the same one Mom insisted I install when I bought the place. "What if something happens to you?" she'd asked, hand on my arm. "We just want to be able to get in. Help if we need to." I crouched down, unscrewed it slowly. The metal was cool in my hand, coated in dust and the unspoken weight of what had been. Then I stood, walked to the trash can, and dropped it in without ceremony. They'd written me out of the family story, but I'd started writing them down. In affidavits, in testimony, in the truth that finally had a paper trail. You can forgive someone from a distance. That's what fences are for. Love with a lock. They wore their Sunday best. I wore everything they couldn't take from me. I stood in the hallway outside courtroom 3B at the Franklin County Courthouse, trying to breathe through the artificial chill of the building. The AC hummed low and constant, but I still felt sweat gather under my collar. Mom sat on the bench across from me, dressed in a navy blue skirt suit I hadn't seen since Grandma's funeral. Her hair was curled at the ends, makeup perfect, except for the smudged mascara already forming just beneath her right eye. I don't think she meant to cry yet. Maybe she was practicing. Dad didn't sit. He stood by the window, arms crossed, gaze steady like he was staring down a sales report. Toby sat between them, thumbing his phone. He hadn't looked at me once. They looked like a family. I looked like a defendant. Marla arrived just before the clerk called us in. She wore her usual blazer, hair pulled back tight, no jewelry but a wedding band, and a thin silver watch that ticked louder in a courtroom than it ever would in the world outside. "You ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be." Inside, the courtroom was smaller than I expected. Cream walls, low ceiling, the kind of fluorescent lights that made everyone look a little more tired. a little less sure. We took our seats. Opposite us sat my parents, Toby, and their attorney, Mr. Faley, who looked like he'd stepped out of a 1980s real estate ad. Too tan, too smooth, and already smirking like he knew the end of the story. "Your Honor," Faley began, rising with his hands politely folded. "This is simply a case of misunderstanding within a tight-knit family. Miscommunication, perhaps. Misinterpretation, definitely. What we have is a son acting out of stress, lashing out at parents who've only ever wanted to protect him and help manage a burdensome property." Marla didn't interrupt. She let him keep going, let the words stack until they leaned like a tower of toothpicks. Then she stood. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "my client isn't acting out. He's responding to concrete violations of privacy and attempted fraud. I've submitted evidence of a forged deed amendment request filed without consent, a credit line opened using his social security number, and a handwritten letter pressuring him to drop legal action. We are not discussing a family squabble. We are discussing criminal conduct." Judge Owens, late 50s, clean-shaven, unreadable, looked down at the files in front of him. He flipped a page, then another. Mom let out a soft sob. Not loud, just enough to register. "Mrs. Marston," the judge said, not looking up, "please keep composure." "Yes, Your Honor," she whispered, dabbing at her eyes with a white handkerchief she must have brought just for this. Dad looked over at me then, not angry, just offended, like I'd broken a code. The room felt like it held its breath while the judge read. The only sound was the shuffling of papers and the occasional creak of a bench shifting. After what felt like a full hour compressed into 10 minutes, Judge Owens looked up. "I am granting a temporary restraining order," he said, voice even. "Effective immediately, Howard and Carol Marston may not contact Reed Marston directly or indirectly, nor enter his property or make financial requests on his behalf. This order extends to digital communication and proxy contact. Violation will result in legal consequences. This isn't a family matter, this is a legal breach." My shoulders dropped a fraction. Not victory, not relief, just oxygen. Faley asked for permission to speak. The judge shook his head. "I've read enough." As we exited the room still quiet behind us, I felt my pulse finally start to slow. Outside the courthouse, I didn't expect him to follow me, but Toby did. He walked fast, caught up just before I reached the sidewalk. I stopped. He didn't meet my eye. "You really did it," he said. "They made the choices, Toby." He shook his head. "You just burned the last bridge, brother." Then he walked off. Didn't yell. Didn't look back. Courtrooms don't ask who loves you. They ask who has the receipts. The house was quiet, but it wasn't peace. It was exile. Back in the kitchen, the stillness felt different now. Heavier. Like someone had vacuumed out all the warmth and left just walls and wood. The overhead light buzzed faintly, like it wasn't sure if it wanted to keep trying. I hadn't eaten since the courthouse. I didn't feel hungry, just hollow. The dishes from the Sunday dinner, roast, slaw, that apple pie no one touched, were long gone. But the plates I'd set aside, the nice ones, were still in the cabinet. I hadn't had the nerve to open it since. I stood there, leaning on the counter, wondering what came next. That's when the text came in. "Micah, are you still my uncle?" It sat on my screen like a dropped question in a funeral. Simple. Software too loaded for someone his age. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know what to say. Maybe someday. Maybe not yet. Maybe always. A knock came about 20 minutes later. Steady. Polite. Not the way Dad used to knock. Short, hard, like he already owned the place. Mr. Burris stood there in his usual canvas jacket and work boots, holding a thermos in one hand and a look that said he didn't come to fix anything. "Mind some company?" he asked. "Come in." He poured 2 cups from his thermos without asking, the way someone does when they've lived long enough to skip permission. "Court went the way you wanted?" he asked, settling into the chair by the window. "I got the order, but not the peace." I nodded. We drank in silence for a while. Outside, a dog barked in the distance. Someone started a lawnmower 2 streets over. Normal sounds in a world that didn't feel normal anymore. "I didn't speak to my brother for 40 years, Burris said suddenly. I looked at him. He tried to take Mom's land, swore she gave him verbal permission. No paperwork, just talk. Lawyers got involved. I sided with her. He never forgave me. "Did it get better?" I asked. He shrugged. "I got older, so did he. But we never made it back." "That bother you?" "Every damn day," he said, not unkindly. "But sometimes, silence is the only language they understand." I nodded again, slower this time. When he left, I stood at the front door a moment longer than I meant to. The porch creaked as I stepped down, the wood soft from last spring's rain that I never bothered to seal. Then I saw it. The nameplate. A little brass rectangle Mom had nailed to the side of the mailbox last year. The Marstons. Plural. Presumptuous. I went into the garage, pulled out the old red toolbox I hadn't touched since the backsplash project. The screwdriver slipped once before catching the first nail. Each turn felt like undoing something I'd been afraid to name. When it came free, I held it for a moment, just long enough to feel the weight. Freedom can be deafening when all you've known is noise called family. You can seal a document in ink, but sealing yourself takes longer. Marla's office was colder than usual, or maybe it was just me. The blinds were tilted just enough to let in a gray slice of morning light. It stretched across her desk, cutting through the neat stacks of folders and yellow legal pads like a slow-moving blade. She didn't ask how I was. She never did. Not because she didn't care, but because she knew the answer didn't matter when the forms were already printed and waiting. "This is the permanent injunction request," she said, tapping the top page. "Restraining order included. I've also added defamation, attempted credit fraud, and a formal claim of document manipulation." She looked up. "This isn't just to stop them from knocking. It's to draw the line in the sand." I nodded. I hadn't slept much. Again. But this kind of exhaustion wasn't from lack of rest. It was the kind that comes when you carry silence too long and finally put it down. "Court clerk says she'll prioritize it once we file. We've got everything we need, including your signature." She passed me the pen. The chair creaked as I leaned forward. I stared at the line with my name printed above it. Reed Marston. Nothing fancy. No middle initial. Just me. For the first time, I wasn't signing a lease or a paycheck or a sympathy card. I was signing for myself. When the ink hit the paper, I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel powerful. I just felt real. Like something had settled inside me, even if the rest of the world hadn't caught up yet. The door opened. Russell stepped in, holding 2 paper cups. "Hope she didn't make you sign anything with blood," he said, handing me one. "Not yet," I said. But she looked tempted. Marla didn't smile, but the corner of her mouth twitched. "This is it then," Russell said, settling on the edge of a filing cabinet. "This is you drawing the final line." Feels more like I finally picked up the pen. We sat in silence for a beat, the kind of silence that feels earned. "I still remember what my grandpa used to say," I told them. "Paper protects property, backbone protects pride." Marla gave a single nod. "Then let's protect both." The filing took less than 10 minutes. Electronic submission, time-stamped and sealed. That's how quiet justice begins sometimes, not with gavel strikes, but with PDF attachments and the hum of a printer. When I stepped back out onto the sidewalk, the clouds hadn't moved. The air smelled like dust and coffee. I didn't expect the world to look different, but it did. Just a little. Like maybe it was tilting back in my favor. My phone buzzed. Voicemail. Leanne. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. I heard about the court stuff, her voice said, software measured, still carrying the same steadiness I remembered. If you're open to it, I'd like to talk. She didn't say more. She didn't have to. Sometimes courage isn't fighting louder, it's filing quieter. And sometimes, after enough noise, quiet is exactly where healing begins. They wanted the house. I gave them the rooms in my memory, and kept the deed. It was early autumn when I finally opened every window. The air outside had the first bite of the season in it, crisp enough to lift the curtains and move through the place like a guest who hadn't been invited, but was welcome anyway. The house smelled different now. That kitchen, once a stage for quiet judgment and louder silences, smelled like fresh paint and something close to freedom. The off-white cabinets Mom once insisted made the space feel mature were gone, replaced with warm pine I'd stained by hand. The kind of wood that didn't hide its imperfections. I'd taken the time to sand every panel. It wasn't about the finish, it was about the process, about scrubbing off what had lingered too long. In the backyard, the grill smoked gently. Russell manned it like a man with a mission, spatula in one hand, beer in the other. He wore a flannel that didn't match his jeans and cracked jokes that didn't always land. But the sound of him laughing, and the way people joined in without effort, filled the space like insulation I didn't know I'd been missing. Lorna was there too. She brought apple cobbler and sat close to the edge of things, like someone still learning what safety looked like. But when Mr. Burris refilled her cup without asking, she didn't flinch. The yard lights flicked on as the sun dipped, strings of warm bulbs casting soft halos over the fence line. A few neighbors dropped by. People I barely knew. One brought a pie. Another just smiled and nodded like they'd heard the noise and decided it was good noise for once. I stepped inside for a minute, just to grab more plates. That's when I saw it. On the wall near the front door, the empty spot where the old coat rack used to hang. I hadn't filled it yet. Maybe I didn't need to. I walked out with the plates just in time to see Micah pass by in Toby's truck. He sat in the passenger seat, window down, hoodie half zipped. He saw me. We made eye contact, and he smiled. Just a little. He didn't wave, didn't yell anything, but he smiled. That was enough. Later, after the last cup had been rinsed and the final ember from the grill had gone cold, I stood on the porch alone. The house behind me didn't feel haunted anymore. Just quiet. My kind of quiet. I walked to the doorway, pulled out a wooden plaque I'd carved 2 nights earlier in the garage. I held it up. It read, Marston House 1 Key. 1 Life. I nailed it into the frame, slow and steady. The wood accepted the nails like it had been waiting for this version of the story to be told. I turned to go back in, but something caught my eye. Beneath the porch beam, still there, half hidden by time and weather, was the old emergency key box, forgotten. Or maybe I'd left it there out of habit, out of softness. I went into the garage and grabbed the drill. Reclamation isn't loud. It's a quiet click of a lock that now only you can open. There's loud silence. And then there's the kind that drips into your coffee cup every morning. That kind had settled in around me lately, like fog that didn't want to lift. Not angry silence, not even bitter. Just the kind that made a man feel like background noise in his own life. The gas station on Main had always been a friendly stop. It wasn't fancy. 2 pumps, chipped concrete, and a bell that dinged when you opened the door even though no one ever fixed it. I used to nod to the same clerk every Thursday, chat about the weather or how the Browns were still losing. But this morning she didn't look up when I stepped in. I set my coffee down, exact change. She rang it up without a word. No eye contact, no, "Have a good one?" Just silence that knew exactly what I'd done and wasn't ready to forgive me for it. When I got back outside, the man filling his truck at Pump 2 gave me a glance, then quickly turned away. A week ago, we'd talked about mulch prices and frost warnings. I drove to town hall to drop off paperwork for the restraining order renewal Marla had advised. On the way in, I passed 2 women on the steps. One I recognized from the church Mom used to drag us to. As I walked by, I heard her whisper to the other, "That's him." Sued his own parents. No venom in her voice, just that tone small towns use when they decide someone isn't ours anymore. I didn't flinch. I didn't respond. I just kept walking. That evening, I sat in the back of a room in the rec center basement, folding chair beneath me, coffee in a styrofoam cup in my hands again. Same drink, different reason. The flyer called it a family estrangement support circle. 5 people showed up that night, mostly older, mostly quiet. The man next to me introduced himself as Marvin. 62, neat beard, corduroy jacket. Said his daughter hadn't spoken to him in 12 years. "Her mom poisoned her against me," he said. "I made mistakes. Big ones. But she wouldn't let me even try to fix it." The room nodded. Not in agreement, just in recognition. When it was my turn, my voice caught in my throat before I spoke. "My parents tried to take my house," I said finally. "Filed legal paperwork, identity theft, then made me the villain when I didn't hand them the keys with a smile." No one gasped. No one looked shocked. Just quiet understanding. I was raised to believe family meant sacrifice, no matter the cost. But I think maybe they just meant it was always my cost. Someone across the room, woman in her 50s, short hair, worn denim, said, "You didn't break the family. You stopped its cycle." The words landed somewhere deep, not like a compliment, more like a diagnosis you've carried without a name. Afterward, Marvin walked me to the parking lot. "You know what hurts most?" he asked, pulling his coat tighter. "It's not the fights. It's the silence that follows, the kind that never asks what really happened." I nodded. "It's louder than shouting ever was." "Yeah," he said, "but you're still here. That counts." I drove home in silence, but for once it didn't echo. It settled. No turkey, no tradition, just stew, stories, and people who stayed. The backyard patio wasn't fancy, the picnic table was secondhand, the folding chairs were mismatched, and the string lights swayed slightly in the late November chill, like they weren't quite sure they'd hold through the wind. But it felt right. I'd cooked all morning, beef stew in a Dutch oven I'd bought on clearance, cornbread from a box, extra butter added because that's what Lorna said made it taste like childhood. No one asked for stuffing. No one missed the cranberry sauce that always sat untouched anyway. Mom used to say Thanksgiving without turkey was like family without rules. I disagreed now, strongly. Russell brought his old cassette player, the one with the duct-taped corner, and a sound that faded just enough to make it nostalgic. We laughed over Harvest Moon, the tape warping slightly on the chorus, like even Neil Young didn't want to sing too perfectly that night. Lorna arrived with a store-bought pie and an apology. "I didn't bake this," she said, setting it down. "But I figured it's not about the crust." Mr. Burris brought his famous thermos of spiked cider and sat back quietly, only chiming in to comment on the stars or correct someone's memory of a local baseball game from 1978. 2 women from the support group, Trina and Dolores came too. They didn't say much at first. Just sat, watched, smiled. By the second round of cornbread, Trina was talking about her ex-husband's terrible taste in wallpaper, and Dolores was laughing so hard she had to lean on Lorna's shoulder. There were no toasts, no dramatic speeches, just warmth. In bowls, in glances, in the quiet understanding that not all families gather around the same last name. It was after dessert, just as Russell was changing the tape, that I saw the headlights. Toby's truck. I froze. But it wasn't him who stepped out. It was Micah. He walked up slowly, bundled in a gray hoodie, hands in his pockets. His mom stood by the passenger door. She didn't move. Micah stopped a few feet from the edge of the patio, pulled something from his coat, a card. He held it out. I stepped forward, took it. It was small, plain. On the front, a drawing of a leaf. Inside, 2 words written in that careful way kids write when they're not sure how much to say. Happy Thanksgiving, Uncle Reed. He didn't wait for me to open it. Just gave me a half smile, nodded once, and turned back to the truck. They didn't stay. They didn't need to. Later, as the last plates were stacked and Burris quietly dozed in his chair, Lorna looked at me and said, "Feels like a holiday. First one in a long time?" I nodded. It wasn't loud. It wasn't crowded. No one brought wine that made people fight, or politics that made them leave early. It was a table of 6, not 30. But it was full. Just before I started cleaning up, my phone buzzed in my back pocket. A message. Leanne. Still up for that coffee? I looked out at the backyard, at the lights, at the empty chairs and the warmth that lingered like steam from a mug. Family isn't who shares your DNA. It's who shares your table and never asks for proof. She didn't stir her coffee. She never did. Leanne liked things raw. The rain hadn't let up since morning. It tapped steady against the windows of the corner coffee shop, the kind of sound that made you speak softer without realizing it. Outside, traffic moved slow and quiet. Inside, the space smelled like cinnamon and wet wool. She was already there when I walked in. Same seat by the window, back to the wall, one hand cupped around her mug like she needed the warmth more than the drink. Her hair was shorter now, her eyes just as sharp. "Hey," I said, "hey." We didn't hug. We didn't need to. There's something about old love that doesn't ask for updates. It already knows the shape of you, just waits to see what's changed. I sat down across from her. The table was small, the kind that makes knees touch by accident. I ordered a black coffee. She didn't ask what took me so long to reply. I didn't ask what made her reach out after all these years. "I used to come here every Sunday," she said, looking around. "After you left." I nodded. "Still play the same jazz mix?" She smiled faintly. "Some things don't change." We talked, at first, about nothing, then about everything, our 20s, what we thought we'd be, what we thought we needed. She told me about the job she didn't take in Chicago because she thought I'd come back around. I told her about the night I skipped our coffee date because Dad needed his roof patched, and how I didn't call after. "I knew," she said, "but I also knew you wouldn't say it." "I didn't know how," I admitted. She looked at me for a long second, then back down at her cup. "I stopped reaching out," she said quietly, "when I realized you weren't reaching for yourself." That hit harder than anything in the courtroom. "I kept calling it loyalty," I said, "to my parents, to what I thought was duty. But really, I was just afraid if I said no, I wouldn't be needed anymore." She nodded. I took a sip of my coffee. It was bitter and too hot, but grounding. "I finally made a home," I said. "Not just a house, a place where no one gets in unless I open the door." "And you locked it?" From the inside." She laughed softly, just once. "Sounds like you don't need me to fix anything. That's a first." I smiled, looked out the window. Rain still fell, soft and steady, like it didn't care what it landed on. We sat in silence for a moment. It wasn't uncomfortable, just full. I looked at her. "Do you want to visit the house sometime?" She didn't answer right away. She just lifted her mug and took a slow sip, eyes never leaving mine. And somehow, that said more than words could have. Love isn't always the person. Sometimes it's the clarity they helped you reach, years too late and just in time. They told me to leave the keys. I kept the life that came with them. The morning light spilled across the living room floor like it belonged there. The walls were newly painted, soft gray with warm undertones. Subtle, not cold. I'd chosen the color myself after flipping through 20 paint swatches at the hardware store, holding each one up against the bare walls and imagining what peace might look like. Soft jazz played from a small speaker near the bookshelf. Nothing fancy. Just a low hum of saxophone and piano curling around the space like breath. My coffee sat in my hand, still hot. It tasted fuller these days. Or maybe I'd just learned to drink it slower. I stood near the front door, staring at the small wooden shadow box I'd just finished hanging. Inside it, mounted behind glass, sat the emergency key Mom had insisted on back when I first bought the house. "Just in case something happens," she'd said, voice sweet, persuasive. "We're family." Back then, I didn't question it. I let them in before they even knocked. Today, the key was framed. Not for use, just for memory. A reminder of what I'd survived, what I'd reclaimed. On the small table beneath the shadow box, my laptop sat open. The cursor blinked at the end of the first sentence of my first blog post. Title: "You don't owe your parents your property or your peace." The words didn't come all at once. They came in pieces, in breaths, in truths I hadn't spoken out loud before. I wrote about expectations passed down like heirlooms, about loyalty weaponized in the name of tradition, about how easy it was to mistake sacrifice for love, and how hard it was to unlearn. I didn't write with anger. I wrote with clarity. Midway through, I took a break and opened the small envelope that had arrived in yesterday's mail. No return address. Just my name in the shaky handwriting of a boy still learning how to press evenly. Micah. Inside. A note, folded twice. "One day I want to live in a house like yours, with someone like you." I didn't know if Toby had seen it. I didn't know if it had been mailed secretly or handed over with permission. But I knew what it meant. Kids know what safety looks like, even when adults pretend it's complicated. I placed the note gently beside the keyboard, then walked to the window and pushed it open. The cold morning air rushed in, crisp and clean. I let it touch my face, my hands. I didn't shut it. The wind moved the curtain slightly. It reminded me of the first time I stood in this room alone, unsure if I belonged here, unsure if peace could even be found under a roof with my last name attached to it. Now I knew better. They had tried to take the house. I rebuilt a life instead. I'd lost a version of family, but I'd found something better. A version of myself no one else signed for, no one else held the deed to. And this life, this key, this breath, this quiet, was mine. Not loaned, not shared, just finally mine. You know, looking back, I've learned something that no courtroom or family dinner ever taught me. Sometimes, choosing peace means disappointing people who built their love on control. It's not easy, walking away from what you were told family should be, especially when you were raised to believe that saying no was the same as being ungrateful. But let me tell you something from a man who's been there. Protecting your peace doesn't make you the villain. It makes you someone finally learning to live free. We don't owe people access to our lives just because they share our last name. We owe it to ourselves to build a home, not just with walls and locks, but with truth, boundaries, and people who choose to be there without a hidden agenda. And if you're sitting there wondering, is it too late for me? Let me ask you, what's heavier? Losing someone who never saw your worth, or carrying their weight for the rest of your life? Because here's the truth I hope you remember long after this video ends. Blood makes you related. But respect? Respect makes you family. If this story spoke to you, made you pause, or reminded you of something real in your own life, drop a comment with the number 1 so I know you're out there. And hey, what part of the country are you watching from? I'd love to know which porch, which kitchen, which hometown this story found its way into. If you've got a different perspective or a story of your own, let's talk about it in the comments. There's room at this table for all of us. And if these stories feel like home to you, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so we can keep sharing more moments like this. One quiet truth at a time. Thanks for spending time with me. Till next time. Take care of your peace. It's the one thing no one else should hold the key to.